MS Ramaya University of Applied Sciences.
Hi students, the objective of this lab session is to study amplitude shift keying. The theoretical concepts have already been explained during the hardware implementation. Let us try to simulate an amplitude shift keying system digital modulation technique using Matlab. As it is known, a ASK, that is amplitude shift keying system, modulates digital signals wherein bit 1 is represented by a sinusoid with a defined amplitude and frequency and bit 0 is represented by a 0 volts DC. The Matlab code is developed. As an initial step, the workspace, command window and unnecessary figures are closed. The user is asked to enter the carrier frequency for the carrier wave, that is sinusoid. Next, the user is asked to enter the pulse frequency, that is the frequency of the input data. Further, the amplitude of the carrier is set to 3 volts. It can be varied to a desired value. These steps initializes the input data. The time axis is now initialized with a time step of 0.001 for 1 second data. The carrier sine wave signal is generated with the user-defined amplitude and frequency. A square wave is generated with a set frequency and half the carrier amplitude. This step generates a pulse for the input data. The generated carrier sinusoid is now multiplied with the pulse data. This step would ideally create an ASK signal. The carrier signal is now plot using plot command and labeled accordingly. The input pulse data is plot using plot command and labeled accordingly. Finally, the ASK data is plot and labeled accordingly. The Matlab simulation result is shown depicting the input carrier sinusoid followed by the input pulse information and finally the ASK data. The results shows the input pulse with amplitude 1 is modulated with a carrier signal and 0 is represented with no carrier. This represents the amplitude shift keying signal. The code is written on the Matlab's editor and is as shown. Here, the lab codes are written and saved. The carrier frequency can be assigned through the input command, followed by the input data frequency. The amplitude may also be changed. The carrier is generated using a sine command, followed by a square wave as input data. The generation of ASK is carried out by multiplying the carrier and input data. Click on the Run button to run the code. The simulation code requests for a carrier and input data frequency. The data is entered. The simulation plots the ASK waveform. The ASK generation can be carried out by varying the input data such as frequency and amplitude. This completes the simulation of ASK. Thank you.
At MSR, you mark your imagination other.